There are so many women who have alternated the courses of today and our future with their works of the past, decisions made and utilized by a single thought brought to the world where it is today, and we didn't even realize it happened till it happened. Like the decisions of Joan of Arc. Joan of Arc is a patron saint of France, honored as a defender of the French nation for her role in the siege of Orleans and the coronation of Charles VII of France during the 100-Year War. Born in the peasant family in the northeast of France in 1428, she requested to be taken to Charles after later testifying that she was guided by the visions from the Archangel Michael, Saint Margaret, and Saint Catherine to help him save France from English domination. Her faith and loyalty of God gave her the strength to follow her decisions to move forward with the choice, convinced of her devotion and purity. Charles sent Joan, who was about 17 years old, to the siege of Orleans as a part of relief army, and she arrived the city of April 1942, wielding her banner and bringing hope to the demoralized French army. 9 days later, after her arrival, the English abandoned the siege, and Joan encouraged the French to aggressively pursue the English during the Loire campaign, which culminated to another decisive and very victorious of the Patay, opening the way for the French army to advance at Reims unopposed, where Charles was crowned as the King of France with Joan at his side. In 1456, an inquisitor court investigated Joan's trial and overturned the verdict, declaring that it was tainted by deceit and procedural errors. Joan has been revered as a martyr and viewed as an obedient daughter of the Roman Catholic Church and an early feminist and a symbol of freedom and independence. A member of the Lemhe-Shoshone tribe, 16-year-old Sacagawea traveled thousands of miles with Meriwether Lewis and William Clark, a corpse of discovery expedition all the way from the modern-day North Dakota to the Pacific Ocean, acting as their interpreter, guide, and foraging for food and helping them forge invaluable relationships with the Native Americans. And she did all this while carrying her newborn on her back. The National American Women's Suffrage Association of the early 20th century adopted her as a symbol of the women's worth and independence, erecting several statues and plaques in her memory. As incredible and wonderful as she is alongside Dorothy Vaughan and Mary Jackson, Katherine Johnson was an American mathematician whose calculations of orbital mechanics and NASA were critical to the success and of the first subsequent U.S. crew spaceflights, and she had earned a reputation for mastering complex manual calculations and helped pioneer the use of computers to performing the task. The space agency noticed her historical role as one of the first African American women to work as NASA as a scientist. After graduating at the age of 14 from high school, she took every mathematics course offered from her college at WVSC. Several professors mentored her, including chemist and mathematicians Angie Turner King, and she was then also able to launch her career as a research mathematician, and although it was extremely difficult for African Americans to enter, she was able to get into NACA, a National Advisory Committee for Aeronautics, which later turned into NASA. In her career, she worked as a computer where she calculated the trajectory for Alan Shepard, the first American into space, and John Glenn, who really did personally ask her to recheck the calculations before his flight on Friendship 7. There, he became the first American to orbit the Earth thanks to Katherine. And speaking of science and the power of the mind, that definitely also goes to Flossie Wong-Stahl. Now, I know many not really know her, but she was essentially the reason why her work will ripple and affect in history. Wong-Stahl was actually the first scientist to clone HIV and create a map of its genes, which led to a test for the virus. A key figure in recognizing the human immune deficiency virus, also known as HIV, is also requiring the cause of immune deficiency syndrome in AIDS. Molecular biologist and virologist Flossie Wong-Stahl, age 62, was born Yi Cheng Wang in China. After Wong-Stahl and her family fled to Hong Kong, she excelled extremely in academics and eventually took an interest in science. The first female in her family to ever attend university, she pursued both her undergraduate and graduate education in UCLA, earning a degree in bacteriology and a doctorate in molecular biology. Her contribution to the areas of bacteriology and retroviruses have been vital to understanding HIV and AIDS and paved the way for later advancement. Wong-Stahl retired from UCSD in 2002 with a title professor emerita. She then became a vice president and chief scientific officer of Imosol, and a drug development company that she co-founded in San Diego. Wong-Stahl renamed the company to ItherX Pharmaceuticals and switched its focus to improving treatments for hepatitis C. I wasn't good at math, but Ada Lovelace definitely was, and honestly, power is defined with knowledge, and like the previous, it showcased a lot how powerful it was to create. Knowing the Countess Lovelace, she was noted as an English mathematician and writer, chiefly known for her work for Charles Babbage, proposed mechanical general-purpose computer and the analytical engine. She was actually first to recognize the machine had applications beyond calculations, and essentially Ada is considered the first computer programmer. And even though she wrote about the computer, the analytical engine, that was never built, she realized the computer could follow a series of simple instructions, a program to perform a complex calculations, as well as could be used to perform operations on other things besides number, such as musical notes. From a modern perspective, her work is visionary, and in her lifetime, her scientific contributions hardly attracted any attention. Only a small small piece of analytical engine was actually ever built. And Ada Lovelace died in 1852, and her fame of course lives on as she is noted as the Ada programming language and is celebrated on every second Tuesday in October. I've mentioned her a few times before, but she's also known as the wife of the once famously driven pharaoh that led the greatest in Egypt, Ramses III, who was also famously known as the leader of the time during the first labor law strikes in history, with Egyptians going on strikes and their managers not paying on them on time. So what does this have to do with the Queen T? Well, aside being the second wife, she was also the mother of Prince Pentawere, who like most princes would be competing for the throne. There's still a lot of debate what conspired the day of Ramses III's death or why it even happened, but there was no doubt that Queen T and her son were the headliners of the tragedy that bestowed on the pharaoh. Apparently, due to the strikes that occurred, the war accumulating by the banks against the sea peoples, King Ramses III was preoccupied with ensuring the safety and the independence of Egypt. But during this time, noted for his succession was essential for those who would take over if he ever passed away, and since Egypt was going through another famine, lack of agricultural funding, or support due to ongoing wars and strikes, the people were getting frustrated, and eventually Ramesses was unable to sustain it all. And under the eyes of the queen and her selfishness, like through her decisions, she decided to have her son, Prince Pentawere, not being by his side instead of Ramses IV, would most likely be the next in line. Still, if this wasn't enough to tip over the queen, she hired the pharaoh's harem to conduct spells and repel his guards when he was assassinated. And because of that, she was eventually caught, and so was her son, and they were sentenced to not be treated at the funeral rites like all other great kings and queens, and their locations of their bodies still remain unknown and unsolved. She Sells Seashells by the Seashore is actually based on Mary Anning. Who is Mary, you might ask? Well, a very important woman that her discovery was left unnoticed. Mary was a working class seashore collecting turned paleontologist in Dorset when she went on to becoming a world-leading expert on prehistorical fossils in Britain. While walking her dog Trey on the Blue Lies cliffs near her home, she collected her first fossils worried that they'd be lost to the tide. During her career, she discovered various dinosaur skeletons and fish fossils and went on consult on global geographical circles. Unfortunately, as a woman, she was not eligible to join the Geographical Society of London, and she did not receive full credit for her accomplishments. But don't worry, Mary, I'm letting the people know here at B that you are remembered. Her story might be one of ambition and regicide, or one of a woman manipulated by an evil puppet master, or maybe both. Either way, her moves to power rippled into Egypt's position. Her husband was Pharaoh Seti II, and Seti II has another queen, but apparently she was too old, and so Tawerset became the second wife. Seti became the pharaoh when he was just very old because his father just refused to die, kind of like the Queen Elizabeth and King Charles thing, and only carried on until Seti was quite elderly in his time, and finally did he become pharaoh. Somehow she ends up becoming standing regent essentially for the next king, who is a young boy named Siptah, who had no relationship to her at all. A chancellor named Bey tries to puppet Tawerset and use her as a royal female, but before Siptah dies just a few later from a health issue due to inbreeding, he gets rid of the chancellor and Tawerset is then placed as his regent. The question of whether or not she killed the king herself or used the king herself as a puppet to get rid of Bey is still unknown, but either way, Tawerset ends up taking the reins into Egypt into her own hands and named herself not just queen, but pharaoh. Because Egypt does not like removing pharaohs from power, they would end up tolerating the chaos from a pharaoh, but with her specifically, they just didn't like her. So then she dealt with a lot of contenders to her throne, but unfortunately she did end up getting overthrown herself, and by the 19th dynasty, they ended up seeing her as a weak leader. In regards to Tawerset though, it is still biased from a certain point of view when it comes to female pharaohs, or even if they're noted as female pharaohs, but either way, she's still a very powerful figure in history. When you want to do something right, you gotta do it, and that's what American journalist Nellie Bly did. Born Elizabeth Cochan Seaman, she used her pen name Nellie Bly as she went undercover as a women's lunatic asylum on Roosevelt Island. During this asylum expose, Nellie had difficulty admitting, so she actually checked herself into the boarding house and stayed up all night to make herself look distraught and crazy. She refused to go to bed and eventually scared the other patrons in the boarding house, and finally she was admitted to where she experienced firsthand on the field the mistreatments and the devastating conditions and harm patients had to endure. In her report published in 1887, her later book, published 10 Days in a Madhouse, caused such a sensation it actually prompted an investigation to the asylum, implementing reforms and shed the light of significant impact on American culture. She's covered the women's suffrage processions and was actually the first woman reported to visit war zones in World War I between Serbia and Austria, and in 1998 she was inducted into the National Women's Hall of Fame. And we had mix of historical figures, mathematics, arts, and military women who changed history, but including science, we must include Henrietta Lacks. Henrietta Lacks Sells cells enabled huge advancements in medical science and the cell lines that was being used in research institutions worldwide, but they were also taken without her consent. Miss Lack's family actually never received any compensation and had fought for years to get justice for the stolen cells. Miss Lack's, a 31-year-old mother from Baltimore, Maryland, began experiencing pain in her abdomen and abnormal bleeding in 1951. She was examined by gynecologists at Johns Hopkins Hospital, where they discovered a large mass on her cervix. Without informing her or asking her for permission, doctors sent a sample of her tumors to a lab for medical research before treating for her aggressive cervical cancer. But while nearly all cell cultures died quickly, cells taken from her continued to multiply and didn't age, making them immortal. The cell line, called HeLa after Miss Lack's first and last name, was sent to research labs around the world. According to the World Health Organization's HeLa cells actually led to the creation of the polio vaccine and advancement in HIV, cancer, and infertility research. Henrietta Lacks changed the course of modern medicine, and it is long past time that we recognize her life-saving contributions to the world. And to me, that's why she's number one on this list, because without her research used to be conducted to save lives today wouldn't exist. And thanks to her, we wouldn't know where we'd be today. And that's actually all for today. Thank you for watching. Be sure to like and subscribe. My name is Jess, and I wish you all the best. Bye.